All right. So that was good. Thank you. I've got a few more questions. Let's have a look. So let's start from why does the Seasteading Institute want to create or want to establish seasteads as city-states?
Well, the idea of seasteading is the potential of the ocean frontier for being the startup sector for governance. It's not it's a place where there's not that many resources, and the resources that are there are already being extracted, right? Like oil and natural gas. And what we're really excited about is the potential of a frontier for political innovation.
Nice. So, what kind of politics do you think people will gravitate to first when starting up the beginning seasteading, like in the first like 10 years or 20 years?
It's hard to know. The way that we think of it is that you make a good product by focusing on what the customer wants. This is true in every field, and ideology doesn't tend to make good products. So it's sort of like, it's hard to predict in advance what the internet would be used for. But knowing that it's such a powerful many-to-many communications technology, it was clear that it was going to have big impact on the world. Same thing with seasteading. Our idea is that shifting to focusing on what customers want, like what, you know, people want a positive experience from their government, just like they want a positive experience from a coffee shop or a computer that they buy. And to us, that's the big shift, is focusing on what the consumer wants, which governments don't do very much today. And as to, what will happen after that shift, what kinds of governments people want, it's hard to say. I think that they will sort of have more bang for the buck in terms of the level of services they're provided for a given tax level. The private sector tends to be much more efficient at things. And if we have governments competing with each other and startups coming in there with great ideas for new types of societies, I think that we'll see people just get more for their money like they do in any competitive industry.
That's interesting. That ideologies don't create good products, but I mean, there has to be some sort of agreement between the sovereign countries, or the sovereignty of the country that the seasteads are going to be floating around. But then you have the choice between different countries and different sovereignties to sort of seastead within. But well, I guess the question is, what types of how will seasteading evolve while living under sort of the sovereignty of governments or countries that they're localized around?
Yeah, that's a great question. So what we imagine is that for the first several decades, seasteads are going to have to fit into existing maritime law, where they sort of franchise their sovereignty from some existing country. But because they can, the way maritime law works, because ships are mobile, there's sort of a virtual association between a ship and a country. And so that virtual association means that in a sense, all the existing countries are competing to, say, flag ships, or in our case, to authorize seasteads. So it's actually a pretty good competitive market, whereas any one piece of land is owned by exactly one country. And then in several decades, as seasteads become, international political, economic powers, to where it's actually reasonable, if you compare them to other existing countries in terms of size, for them to seek sovereignty, then they will. And we think that, it's the right of any group of organized people to eventually have self-determination and political autonomy, and that eventually seasteads will be in a position to do that.
I guess it's pretty hard to uproot like a large section of land and take it to another place where there's going to be lots of ideals that you can exist under, or that yeah. So what's the difference
That's
between
right.
making like a little plot of land a country or startup sort of city state, and
Yeah,
doing
that's,
it on the high seas?
well, that's a great question. And in fact, I'm involved in other projects working to build charter cities on land, where it's much easier to build, but the degree of autonomy is more limited. I mean, I'd say that the major differences are that, one, the ocean's a lot more difficult and expensive, but two, well, you get two things from it. One is that the path to sovereignty is much clearer. So with a charter city where you have an agreement with an existing country, you're always under their sovereignty. Whereas the seastead out there in unclaimed, unoccupied ocean has a much better case to eventually say, hey, this is ours. We've homesteaded it, basically. And then the third difference, which is really interesting from a transhumanist technology perspective, is that the ocean is it's a different physical medium than land. It's one which is more dynamic, fundamentally more dynamic, more dynamic as a fundament. A big cruise ship is actually as big as a skyscraper, and yet it moves around all the time. So our land-based intuition, doesn't really get the way that you could actually recombine and remix these floating cities. A building can move from one city to another, and so the cities will actually be competing for buildings. So there's a sense in which the right of secession is kind of guaranteed by the laws of physics on the ocean. And one cool thing about this is that not only does it apply to the ocean, but it applies even more so to space, not to other planets, but when you're outside of gravity wells, you're actually in a situation where buildings can be rearranged even more easily than on the ocean. And so, this kind of economic political theory that I came up with, it's untested right now, but if it turns out to be true, we'll see societies on the ocean and in space be fundamentally more innovative and dynamic because of this physical rearrangeability. I expect to see these cities built in modular ways so that you could move a building from one city to another to take advantage of that. And that's something that's different. It's just a physical characteristic that land doesn't have.
Yeah, definitely. I can imagine harvesting energy could be quite interesting in a unique way of harvesting energy on the seas, even today than you would on land. If that can be developed, I'd be quite surprised if it wouldn't be. It would be quite easy, maybe at sea, to have some sort of energy harvester dangling from the bottom of a platform, working against the dynamics of the sea. That'd be interesting. But another question is, a lot of people get a little bit scared when they sort of think of an unknown sort of group or of people doing something different and going out to sea and creating a new political ideology. I guess it's deeply rooted in our evolutionary psychology around sort of paranoia of local clans and what are they doing over there sort of thing. Teal has been quoted as saying there's quite a lot of people who think it's not possible. That's a good thing. We don't need to worry about these people very much because since they don't think it's possible, they won't take us very seriously. And they will not actually try to stop us until it's too late. So right. That's his quote. That's his words. So what about the people who do think it's possible? Will they try and stop you? And for what reasons?
I mean, I think that they don't really have the incentive to do so, right? I mean, talk is cheap, and it's one thing to sort of say, well, okay, this sounds weird to me. It's another thing to put resources into going and stopping people who aren't bothering you. But I think it's really important that we not pose a threat to existing nations, that we respect their sovereignty the way we're asking them to respect our local political independence. So, for example, cooperating with international police who are stopping money laundering and international criminal activity, not having business models based around violating the sovereignty of an existing country, which I'm sure viewers can imagine plenty of, but more business models like medical tourism. Come here for less expensive medical procedures or for innovative medical procedures that you can't get at home. And I think that's super important. To be good global citizens, basically.
Definitely. So, why has these sorts of things, not necessarily exactly the same, but why have sort of attempts to have autonomous sort of political ideas failed in the past, like communes, for instance?
Well, I think one reason is that ideology-technology difference that we talked about earlier, is that those communes are based around ideologies as opposed to saying, hey, how can we, this is an industry, as an entrepreneur, right? It's like, hey, this is an industry that's ripe for disruption. It's a huge industry. It's actually the largest sector of the global economy. It's government's 30%. and like people are endlessly complaining about how poorly their needs are being met, how slow the service is. This seems like something where we could come in and make a better product that serves people better. And in that case, if people don't like it, if it fails the way the communes failed, that means that we failed as entrepreneurs to make a better, compelling product that overcame the disadvantages, the remoteness and isolation with things that enable people to thrive. And so it really becomes no longer a question of like, oh, like did these communes have the right philosophy, or like is there a conflict between utopianism and pragmatism? But simply a question of like, hey, are people's needs for better governance great enough that they can pay the costs of us creating, say, floating cities on the ocean?
Yeah, that's interesting. I think it's very, like what you said before. If people are sick, they're dying, and they want to use themselves to, if they choose to use themselves to test a new and promising breakthrough in medical technology, for instance, some new exotic stem cell therapy. Where are they going to be able to get that done if it's regulated by really slow, tardy laws, and patent landmines stopping the development of such technologies? What are they going to do?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is one of the powerful ways in which we can help humanity by providing a place where innovative medical procedures are being delivered, and there's not this huge gap between when something's discovered and when real people who weren't able to get into clinical trials can actually use it. And I think it's important to keep in mind that gap kills people. You have ridiculous cases where, for example, the European Union and the US FDA, they both have just as stringent policies on regulating drugs, but they don't accept, going through trials in one place doesn't get you into the other place. So, the researchers who have looked into this, they can find single examples of drugs where the delay in getting it approved in the other jurisdiction actually cost more lives than the drugs like thalidomide that hurt people, that caused these regulations to be put into place. The total count of all the drug delays is literally 1,000 times more lives that have been cost than lives that have been saved. And it's easy to pick out even just a single drug here or there, which costs more lives because of the delay.
Yeah.
So it's a really terrible situation, and part of our approach is to say, look, this situation is an opportunity for us as entrepreneurs to work around this dysfunctional part of the situation, and provide this as a service to people.
Yeah, that's true, and also provide an incentive for drug developers to, I guess, research and develop in different ways. You see, it doesn't. People can then have platforms to where an ideology supports their methods of creating new drug delivery techniques or testing in different ways. I guess people are a little bit afraid of that at the same time. They might think a seastead could turn into an island of Dr. Moreau.
Yeah, I mean, people are definitely going to have concerns, and it's important that we make sure that people who are using these innovative medical procedures are doing so with full knowledge of what testing has been done on them to date, so that they can have fully informed consent.
Sure, but people could always people can I guess vote with their steads, so to speak, or vote with which seastead they go to, depending on whether they want to play it safe or whether they want to do something relatively new to the market when it comes to medical technologies.
Yeah.
They want to be a guinea pig or not.
I mean, one thing I want to reiterate is this issue of people being concerned. I think that with our political mindset, we think, oh, people are concerned, and we think about voting, and we say, if people are concerned about this, then that's bad and that's a threat. But the great thing about this sort of, consuming government, shopping for government mindset is, if people are so bothered by a political experiment that they say, hey, we're going to go send a aircraft carrier. Okay, that's a problem. But people are like, I don't like that political experiment. I wish it didn't happen. That's actually not an issue for us. That our primary concern as businesses will be our customers, right? Are we making them happy? Are we making their lives better? Do the people who come and get our medical procedures go home and say, wow, it's really amazing that there's a place in the world where I was able to get this experimental procedure for this condition that's been plaguing me? And so we can focus much more on our customers and not worry so much about, what do 60% of people in the world think about us? And I think that that's incredibly powerful, and that will lead to government that really serves people's needs as opposed to the sort of lowest common denominator that you get today.
Yeah, that's interesting.
I mean, imagine an industry where like everybody uses the same product. And there's actually an example of this, right? The Trabant, the East German car that, in communist East Germany, everybody got one car, right? There was only one model of car. And, I can assure you that it neither had the sportiness of a two-seater roadster, nor the storage of a cargo van, nor the passenger capacity of a passenger van. It was kind of a one-size-fits-all, or rather, one size fits none very well. Mm-hmm. And what we'd like to do is make government less like that and more like a competitive industry with lots of products targeting different people's needs.
Sounds like it wasn't much of a step up from a horse. So, there's some interesting things. I mean, like, there's some challenges facing the world. There's economic challenges, there's environmental challenges, and also there's some agreement challenges between nations now. How do you think seasteading would help improve or provide means for developing different ideologies or different ways to sort of combat issues with the environment, issues with economy, and issues with clashing ideologies?
Well, you can think of all of these issues as issues of governance and how effective it is. And I think one of the great problems with governance is there's no place to try out new models. And we do a lot more talking about ways of governing than we do actually trying them out. And I think that's one thing that puts people in a mental space of ideology instead of technology. Because when you're just talking about this theoretical thing, oh, what government should we have? What government do I want? It's like this signaling values thing and this, war of morality and arguments. And then when you get down to like the nuts and the bolts of actually designing and implementing a governance system, it's a whole host of practical questions and looking at empirical data about, what seems to drive economic growth and things like that. So I think that having a place where people can actually, in a sense, kind of put up or shut up will defuse a lot of these arguments. It's like, oh, all right, if you think that your ideology is so great, turn it into a technology, build it and live it. And if you can't do that or aren't willing to do it or nobody's willing to join you, it's probably not very good. So let's stop hearing about it. Or, if you want to talk about it, don't expect anyone to listen.
Yeah, that's interesting. I get the sense that once, if some seasteading ideologies or some seasteads work, there will be some form of feedback into local governments or the countries in which they're, and may actually influence the way that they evolve as well.
Yes, and that's absolutely critical. I mean, I think that's actually the greatest potential influence that seasteading can have. And again, I think of it by metaphor with conventional industries, with the interplay between startup sectors and big companies, right? If you look at any industry, you've got startups who are small teams, starting with a fresh look and trying things that are really different. And what they are is they're kind of exploring for a new way of doing things which actually works better. And then you have the big companies, and what they specialize in is scale, is delivering ideas to a lot of different people. And those two niches, they need each other, right? One is a source of innovation, the other is a source of delivering it to as many people as you can. And with governance, it's like, okay, we have existing big countries that are doing the scale thing. What are we missing? We're missing that startup sector. So I think that if we can open the oceans, this frontier, and try out new things and see what works, with people who chose to opt in, then existing countries, they'll first of all, they'll have proven ideas about what works for them to implement, and second, they'll have a reason to do it because they're worried about the competition, right? Why do big companies implement the new ideas that startups find by copying them, by licensing the IP, by buying a startup? Because they're worried that otherwise they'll lose market share, and the startup will become the new big company. So I think the same dynamic has the potential to positively transform the governance industry.
That's interesting. I was thinking of pirate radio.
Yeah, that's a perfect example. I mean, what ended pirate radio was when the UK opened the airwaves up to more radio stations and started playing rock and roll, in the 70s, because they wouldn't play rock and roll in the 60s, and so people didn't listen to them.
Mm. So, do you think seasteading, seasteads would be somewhat immunized to a degree against rippling effects of political or economic turmoil?
It's difficult to say. I think so. I mean, there's two main factors that point in different directions. One of them is that as small societies at the beginning, they're going to be highly interdependent, right, and highly dependent on the global economy. I mean, like Hong Kong is, right? Hong Kong doesn't grow any of its own food. It exports services to the rest of the world in return for all the things that it doesn't produce. And so seasteads, as small and interdependent, will to some degree be vulnerable. But then the other side of it is that seasteading will lead to a lot more diversity in types of governance. And diversity is strength against external shocks, right? We know from agriculture that if you have a monoculture, one pest can come in that is tuned to that crop and blam, now you have no food, like Irish potato famine. But if you have a diverse set of crops growing, no one pest will wipe them out. And if you look at the economic crisis of, started in 2008, for example, part of the problem was not just interdependence, but that we had like an international financial monoculture to some degree, where in Europe and the U.S., most banks did things the same way. And to a lesser degree in Asia, but still significantly. And so we got this particular financial shock, and it screwed up all of it. If we have a wider variety of different legal, political, economic systems, then no one shock is likely to mess up all of them. We'll be able to pick up and say, okay, we just learned something about which banking systems work better, how we should structure mortgages, and we still have money left because not all of our banks were located in the jurisdictions that did things the foolish way, and they're not all bankrupt. So we're in a better place to move on.
Okay, that's cool. But world powers seem to want to have strategic control over islands in the sea, for instance, so they can sort of land ships and all those sorts of things. So could a country, or is it feasible that a country could want to build their own movable islands or seasteads in a sense, to marshal control over perhaps territory in the sea, for military, strategic or economic advantage? What kind of agreements do you think would keep seasteading citizens safe from such a procedure? Like for instance, if the USA wanted to take military control over a seastead and use it as a base of operations to sort of attack another country or defend its own country, how could the citizens then be guaranteed safety?
Well, you can never guarantee safety, but if you look at the actions of the U.S. in the modern era, unless its own sovereignty is being directly threatened, the U.S. doesn't go around, nabbing people's land. I mean, the U.S. could take over the South Pacific very easily, right? And one of the things about grabbing islands is that in international law right now, any rock that sticks up above water, it comes with a 200-mile resource zone around it of any oil or gas or fishing or anything like that. And so there's a lot of strategic incentive to grab islands because of that rule. But seasteads, they're not going to have, the existing countries wouldn't let them grab all of that 200-mile resource zone. So they're likely instead to only have autonomy on the space just around them, which means that there's no incentive to build seasteads to grab resources. It may be that countries want to build them for some other type of strategic value, but there's going to be a lot less incentive to build them than there is to grab islands right now. I mean, in terms of countries attacking, I think it's mainly a matter, as I said earlier, of not threatening the sovereignty of existing countries and doing things that would, get them wanting to send warships. Having good diplomatic relations the same way that any country does. And if you look at the world, countries do a lot of maneuvering and threatening force over grabbing resources, because if you grab resources, they're worth the full value to whoever has them, right? It doesn't take a good set of laws to take oil out of the ground, black gold. But when you have societies that are based on entrepreneurship, there's a lot less incentive for a country to take them over, because if you take them over and change the rules, it's not profitable anymore. I mean, Hong Kong is such a beautiful example of this, right? In the Hong Kong handover back to China, China changed the political system quite a bit. But how much did they change the economic system? If they changed the economic system, they would lose the thriving economy and dynamism of Hong Kong that makes them want to have it.
Okay, so if do you think there will be much danger of piracy actually coming from seasteads? Like, do you think there'll be seastead pirates waving their modern day cutlasses about and going, "Oh, give me all your whatever the equivalent to opium or pepper is these days on the high seas"?
I think it's always important when asking these questions to look at what's out there on the ocean right now. And if you look at cruise ships, basically they only get attacked by pirates in two places, off the coast of Somalia and off of Malaysia, where there's narrow shipping lanes by weak states that thrive on the piracy. In the rest of the world, you basically don't have it. So I think it's really unlikely. And seasteads are going to be defended a lot better than a cargo ship is, for sure. I mean, a cargo ship has got 10 or 20 crew guarding all of these boxed containers of like neatly packaged goods, and it's not the crew's stuff, so they have little incentive to defend it. With a seastead, you're actually talking about people's homes, right? And so kind of the risk-reward ratio for pirates is going to be terrible. So I think in terms of threats of violence, it's much more about the existing major world powers. Pirates are just not an issue.
How would you classify? I mean, it depends on your point of view what a pirate might be on the high seas. Is there going to be some sort of umbrella set of laws around seasteads, and how you classify somebody as legally a seastead is legally fine and a seastead as a rogue? How is that going to be determined?
There's actually a significant body of international law on this already, governing what counts as a warship on the high seas, and that each vessel needs to be flagged, that warships have to be duly authorized by their country, and about what waters they can and can't go through, and that a vessel that's not flying the flag of some existing countries is considered stateless. I mean, they don't use the word pirate, but it's subject to search and seizure by any nation's monitoring craft. International law evolves in response to circumstances, to what's happening, right? It evolves partly out of case law, how disputes are resolved in practice. So as you actually get seasteads out there, you'll get additional bodies of law growing up around them, around the actual circumstances. We don't have to figure it all out beforehand.
Sure. I mean, some seasteads could be deemed as ideologically rogue. Or cultist, in a sense. And
yeah.
Is that something that should be regulated?
I think so. That's one thing that we've talked about a role. I mean, the Seasteading Institute is a nonprofit. We're not going to directly build and operate these. We think that that's something for entrepreneurs to do as businesses. But we imagine that while right now our role is to research and prove this is possible and build the movement around it, eventually we might become like certifiers of seasteads. And there, we think the most important thing is that people have freely consented to join a given society with a given body of law and can leave. And that if there's some some floating city out there that doesn't let people leave, now I would start to get really concerned about what's going on there and what type of society it is. Because, as long as a consumer is freely chosen, freely enter the society and can freely exit, there's a sense in which you don't have to worry that much about what goes on there, right? You know that if they don't like it, then they'll leave and they have other options. But if a place doesn't let people leave, like East Germany and the Berlin Wall, that there's a pretty high connection between that and it being an awful place for people. So I think it's really important that seasteads have freedom of press to enter, that there's a regular flow of people in and out, and of third-party observers, and that citizens be allowed to leave if they want. But that's just sort of my read initially. It's not for me to know or necessarily or dictate how we're going to regulate them, but that's my feel for it.
Sure. Okay. So I guess I see technology moving on quite quickly. I see there's quite a strong probability that we'll be harnessing nanotechnology to even greater and greater degrees in the near future. For instance, creating space elevators through having highly concentrated nanotechnology or carbon nanotube sort of sheets and climbing up into space. But also, I also imagine that'll also help develop seasteads floating in sea, and also maybe having underwater steads as well. So I can see that there's quite a strong opportunity for this sort of thing as material sciences and true nanotechnology evolves. So what are your views on the time scale of having seasteads as economically viable and as an economically viable option and safe option for most people?
I think about 10 years is the timescale that I expect. That's about how long it'll take to do the engineering research and gather the community in order to start building these at a scale where they make sense economically. In terms of the materials, obviously we benefit from improved material science and stuff like some of the new concretes. Fiber reinforced concrete and self-healing concrete is of a lot of interest to us.
Cool.
I do think that there's some and in the part of people who are into cool technology to sort of, I don't know, see it as
the glories of technology.
Hey, I'm back.
You're back. Did you
Sorry about that. Connection got wonky for a minute.
Yeah. Did you experience quite a bit of a lull in the connection speed?
Yeah. So anyway, I was saying that in terms of new material science, that I think there's a tendency for us technology enthusiasts to kind of be excited about the potential of these things, but that most likely what seasteads need is just massive amounts of good old steel and concrete, just with new designs, new shapes. But we definitely benefit from material science.
Definitely, absolutely. And also perhaps breakthroughs in biotechnology. Craig Venter's looking at creating oil through
Algae.
Through algae. Isn't that amazing? Okay.
Yeah, I know someone at that firm. Yeah, definitely. And again, with medical, the whole field of, the fact that there's so much potential for medical innovation, and medical innovation driven by our new understanding of DNA, the biotech industry, personal genomics. Here we have an industry that's kind of has the potential to explode, and to some degree is exploding in terms of how big a sector it is and how much it helps people. that's being hampered by a lot of stale regulations that don't really address the current situation. So I think that's an incredible opportunity for seasteads to help humanity by helping create new places with more sensible rules.
Definitely. Look, I'm pretty optimistic when it comes to the role of technology in helping solve a lot of the problems that we face now. In how those technologies come about doesn't just pop out of thin air; it comes through ideas, and so I'm quite excited about the seasteading approach to fostering innovation. That's quite a powerful sort of idea there. So,
Thanks. Yeah, that's kind of our innovation, is applying that same idea that technology and entrepreneurship is how you fix a lot of the world's problems, just to this area that people haven't, mostly haven't thought to apply it, is government. And specifically to this insight that I was fortunate enough to have, that if we can open a